Wow, a lot of people all of a sudden.
So many people.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. $75.
Woohoo.
Hi, Yvette in the comments. Waiting for a few more people to come through. Hi, Jean from the comments. Alrighty, we've got a couple more people entering. Are you guys excited? I'm so excited. All right. I think that's everyone. Welcome, everyone, to Design Day Talk 1. We are here today with the amazing Yara. She's Associate Director at Hames Charlie and leader of Sustainability Forum there too. And she loves regenerative design, believe it or not. And she'll be talking to us about that today. Welcome, Yara.
Thanks, Reem. Thanks for that beautiful intro. Appreciate it. And hello, everyone. Na Mani from Tandanya land of the Ghana people. And let me just share my screen and we get cracking. So today we're doing a very quick intro into regenerative design. We will be I'm speaking to you today from Tandanya, land of the Ghana people. And the Ghana spirituality recognizes the connectedness of people and culture with the world of plants, animals, water, land, and stars. The land is alive with traces of dreaming ancestors. I'd like to pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging. Their connection to country is something that we have a lot to learn from. Now, as we begin the presentation, I might just quickly launch a poll. Okay, no, can't do it. So Maddie, can I please ask you to launch the poll so everyone can see it? What I'd like to do today, just for something a little bit different, I want to gauge how many people actually know what regenerative design is. So can I please ask everyone to have a look at the poll and just tell me if you've heard of regenerative design before and if you use it when you design, if it's something that you've actually considered in the past. And wow, a lot of responses coming in already. Thanks everyone, really appreciate it. The reason I'm interested in this is that I speak a lot about regenerative design and not many people actually in the profession know about it or have heard of it, know how to interact with it. So I'm really interested to know, what sort of participation there is from university students. And it looks like you're miles ahead of the actual profession. So that's really great. I mean, it's disappointing for the profession, but great for today's conversation. So why are we here today? We're here to very, very briefly talk about regenerative design, some broad concepts and topics that are related to regenerative design. Now, it's a massive area. I've been playing in this field for about a decade now, and I feel like I'm just, starting to discover it, just the tip of the iceberg. There's just so much knowledge. It's such a huge area, so we're clearly not going to cover it all today. It'll just be a bit of an introduction, a bit of a starting place for everyone to start thinking about this massive topic. So we'll start with some terms of reference just to sort of frame the conversation. I really like this diagram that Stefan Gliman from UniSA has put together in his article, and there's a link in the presentation. I can share the presentation after and everyone can go and read his wonderful article. But he's illustrated how we organize ourselves as a society in terms of ego versus eco. So ego, he's saying, we tend to sort of put ourselves on top. And by ourselves, I mean men. So you can see he's put so men on top and women, whales and other animals are kind of second, third, etc. So that sort of tiered approach with, you know, people being on top of the pyramid is quite typical approach in many countries. But then we also have the eco approach, which is typical in other countries, in particular with First Nations people, where, you know, we are part of a system. We're part of a natural system, most importantly. And that's something that I'll come back to through the presentation, but I just want you to sort of have that front of mind. So then some of the terminology that will come through and that I'm hoping everyone would have as a base, some concepts that I want to make sure that we all know what we're talking about when we say it. First and foremost, scientific approach, you know, that's something that I think all students are sort of encouraged to engage in. And we'll talk today about alternative systems. So the scientific approach is quite linear. You know, we ask a question, we do a research, we have a hypothesis, and we test our hypothesis, and then we come up with results, you know, sort of pass, fail. So very, very linear approach. Another concept that I want to sort of check if anyone is familiar with is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm hoping everyone has heard of them, but if not, I think it's useful to have a look at them. They are sustainable goals, they're not regenerative goals, but they're still a really good place to start the conversation because they are internationally renowned. It is something that, you know, we find quite useful in practice. It's something that is a good sort of measuring tool for us to gauge ourselves against. Biophilia, I'm hoping, is a term that everyone knows and loves. It's literally love of nature. It's something that is very useful for us in design. So having biophilic designs means that we either literally have natural materials or plants or animals or what have you in the design, or we can have references to nature in our design, or we can just have access to nature, so access to natural light and ventilation in our design. So there's a few ways to engage with nature as designers. Sustainability is something that I'll unpack a bit more in the next slide, but just wanted to make sure that everyone knows the term and understands that, you know, roughly speaking, we're talking about the three-legged stool of social, economic, and environmental, and where they intersect and sort of balance each other out. That's where we talk about sustainable design. And then carbon neutrality is something that I think is very topical at the moment. Hopefully everyone has heard about climate change and how carbon emissions are a big problem in terms of climate and what it does to our planet. Now, as I speak, hopefully some questions will come to you. If they do, if you can please jot them down and save them for later. And then at the end of the conversation, if you can put them in the chat, or, you know, if there are burning questions, just put them in the chat as we go and we'll get to them at the end of the conversation. Now, if we talk about the rationale for regenerative design, why do we do it? Why is it important? So as I said, you know, we all know that we're in the middle of a crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. So Architects declares an initiative that architects can choose to engage with. There's also now engineers declare. And it just means that we sign up to it. It's like a petition that we sign up to say that we recognize that we're in the middle of this crisis and that we take responsibility as designers to respond in a meaningful way to this crisis. So as architects, there are many ways that we can engage in this conversation. There are many ways that we can impact the outcome of our current state. So if any of you were part of the conversation on Saturday, I've actually mentioned that 29.6% of carbon emissions in Australia come from the construction sector. So we have a large responsibility for what's happening with emissions in Australia, which means we need to take action. The conversation around sustainability in terms of architecture was quite pivotal in the 80s, late 80s, when the United Nations commissioned the Brundtland Report, known as Our Common Future. And that sort of coined the phrase of sustainability is meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future. And it's very much focused on efficiency, very much a technological approach, scientific approach. As I said before, it's quite linear, and it's got sort of separate categories. It's looking at, economic, environmental, and cultural or political or social, however you want to phrase these things, and sort of looking at these things, as slices of a pie in this instance, where we sort of measure how successful we are in these various areas. And you can see at a glance that where we're failing really badly is in the environmental or ecological components. So it's a very common approach, very well known across the profession. People keep talking about it, saying how, we need to do all these things, but from where we were in 1987 to where we are today, the conversation hasn't really progressed very much, and our impact hasn't really changed very much, which is why we find ourselves in this predicament where, we can't keep talking about, or my thinking is we can't keep talking about just being sustainable and reducing harm and touching the earth lightly. We actually need to actively do good through our designs, be regenerative. And that's the gist of regenerative design for me. The definition of regenerative design isn't really set in stone. So, it's up to every one of us to come up with that definition. But for me, this graph sort of embodies the definition of regenerative design. If anyone has come across Regenesis in the past, you will know that they are wonderful designers that have been playing in this space since the early 90s. They've been doing this actively as part of their practice for many, many years, and wrote a lot of really interesting books and articles about regenerative design. So you can literally say they wrote the book about regenerative design. Bill Reed in particular has got this really good article. It's a very short article, it's just a few pages, about how do we transition from sustainability to regeneration. And this graph is taken from this article, and it actually shows you, where are we today in terms of conventional practice, what sort of impact does it have on the planet? And you can see that it's got really bad impact on the planet. It's actually having a very adverse effect. What would happen if we employ green initiatives like LEED, Green Star, Green Globe, etc.? You can see that we are still having an adverse impact, but it's not quite as bad. What happens if we're sustainable? So we're just doing less bad. So it's neither here nor there. We might not be actually doing harm, but we're not actually having a positive impact either. And then from there, we can build up to restorative, reconciliatory, and regenerative approach. And his article really breaks it down very well. I won't elaborate any further on these, but I think if each of you has the time to read this article, it's only 8 pages. He really explains how we can engage in these positive impacts and positive approaches. And why is it so important? If we think about where we are today and how much work we've got to do, we can see that we actually need to have a paradigm shift. Now, paradigm shifts are few and far between. If we look at Mary Clark's book and her definition of paradigm shifts, she identifies only 2 societal paradigm shifts in the past 2,500 years. One is the Athenian society, and the other one is the Renaissance. And if we think about it that way, it's really quite daunting. It means that there's not a lot of major shifts happening in our society, and it's really hard to enact them. And I think Stephen Sterling explains it really well when he talks about 3 levels of learning. So if we think about that saying of can't see the forest for the trees, if we think about it that way and we think about level one of learning is when you can see the trees as singular elements. You can see that there's single elements, and it's sort of like the scientific approach of identifying single things and looking at them in isolation. Level 2 of learning is sort of stepping out and seeing the forest as a whole, seeing that there are many trees and they are connected and they make up a forest. But then level 3 is being able to have that aerial view, sort of helicopter view, where you hover above and you see the forest within the larger context of the entire world. And that's the highest level of knowledge, of learning. And once we get to that level, that's when we can get to a paradigm shift. And that's why I think it's really important to have these conversations around regenerative design, because the more people know about it, the more people actually use it, the bigger our picture is, and the more likely we are to actually get that critical mass to enact a paradigm shift. So if we talk about the principles of regenerative development, what do they actually mean? So coming back to that diagram of eco and ego, if we think about social structures and how we organize ourselves, what does regenerative look like? I really like this definition by Christian Wahl. He's got lots of articles, books, blogs, what have you. He's very, very active in this space. And he's talking about regenerative human cultures. He's saying that to be regenerative, we have to be healthy, resilient, and adaptable, care for the planet and care for life in the awareness that that's the most effective way to create a thriving future for all of humanity. So recognizing that only by being connected with nature can we really thrive. And if we unpack this a little bit further, if we look at the words that he's using, I think they're very key words that I would hope would come across in your presentations or in your considerations for the competition. The first one being healthy, and another way of saying it is well-being. You know, well-being is a word that we hear a lot today, and it's both physical and mental well-being. We all know that they're both equally as important. So when you think about our society or our community, you know, maybe that's one of the considerations you can come up with, whether or not it's currently healthy, what sort of well-being measures can we look at, what can we improve in terms of well-being. The other key word here is resilience. Now, resilience comes from diversity. It's something that has been proven many times in many ways, even mathematically. You know, it's very, very clear that you can't build resilience without building diversity as well. So that's something that, again, that scientific approach of, you know, being very linear and fragmented and all that is sort of counterintuitive to being resilient, because it looks at things in isolation. So if we think about how diverse our community is or our society is, and if it's not really diverse, can we introduce that diversity? Can we build it up in some way? And then the last key word here is adaptable. And adaptability is our ability to grow and change. And that's something that, you know, with the current crisis of COVID, it really exposed a lot of fractures in that space. You know, a lot of communities just couldn't cope with that sort of adversity. So that's something that's really important for us to consider. Is our society adaptable? If not, how can we help it become more adaptable? This diagram is very convoluted. It's wonderful because it's an illustration of kinship among Walpiri Nation, which is in the Northern Territory of Australia. And it shows how wonderfully complex and diverse Aboriginal society kingship is. So this is just one diagram of one system, but across Australia, Aboriginal people have the most complex kingship systems in the world. People have been dedicating their lives to learning those systems and have been flabbergasted by the complexity of them. I won't go into any detail of it because I'm not an expert and I don't have the ability to unpack this properly, but in very high level, this diagram or the kinship system articulates a person's position and establish it in relation to other people, but also in relation to the universe or the world in which they live. And it describes the responsibility towards other people, towards country, and towards natural resources. So very complex system, but the beauty of it is that it recognizes that we don't just have a responsibility to each other, we also have a responsibility to place. So if we think about First Nations people approach in general, they can teach us, if we are willing to learn, that the entire planet is one sort of household or one society that is interconnected. And we can't really consider things in isolation. We have to have that big picture approach. And as I said before, it's really challenging because we've got those different levels of learning, of knowledge. And while it's quite easy to see the individual components of individual trees, it's a little bit harder to see the forest, and it's much, much harder to see the entire sort of aerial approach. But Aboriginal people in Australia in particular were really, really good with that systematic approach, with that whole system approach. So a lot we can learn from them. So given that approach of, that overall system, it doesn't really make sense to think of individual value. It makes more sense to think about value in terms of shared or an exchange that we circulate through our society. And value doesn't mean money necessarily. I mean, money is something of value, but there are many other ways of articulating value. And what's really exciting at the moment with our profession is seeing how a lot of stakeholders and clients are realizing that, it's a bigger conversation. It's not just about the dollar sign, and understanding that through reciprocation and generosity, you actually create value. So if we think, for example, about this picture, this is an acacia tree, and trees actually have a lot of generosity and a lot of abundance in the way that they distribute their seeds. For a tree to regenerate itself, it only needs 2 or 3 seeds. A couple of them will survive and another tree will be born, and the tree will continue to survive through that. But trees actually are prolific. They're very generous. They produce an overabundance of seeds and share them with their environment, because trees know that by doing that, they support other animals, plants, systems that in turn will provide support back to the tree. So if we embed this sort of thinking of generosity into our systems in terms of design, we can create really beautiful things, and we can start to create regeneration. And again, bear in mind that, this is a nested system. So we can start from a very small scale. If we think about it in terms of biology, we can start from a cellular level, go up to organism, ecosystem, and then ecosphere. And if we talk about societies, we can start from an individual level, go on to a family, and then to the social context of the family, the suburb, the city, and the world. So to summarize very quickly, very high level, regenerative development is about having the wisdom that is rooted in seeing the world in terms of, or shifting our thinking from seeing the world in terms of closed systems or even open systems, to seeing the world in terms of living systems. So regenerative systems need to benefit beyond the system itself. So if we're looking at the place, positive impact should extend beyond the boundaries of the place that we're looking at. So what are some of the tools and processes that we have in place that we can consider? I think as architects, our biggest strength is that we are really good systems thinkers. And what does that mean? Systems thinking is all about making connections. So we're really good at seeing how, seemingly random things can be interconnected and come up and have really beautiful outcomes that might not really make sense if you think about them in isolation, but when you put them together, sort of shake them up a bit, they start to make sense and start to make really beautiful combinations. We're also really good in circular thinking, so seeing how loops can be closed, so how taking one thing, turning it into another, keeping it in circulation and turning it into something else can start to create these circular movements within our designs. We're really good, as I said, at shaking things up and creating innovation or emergence, because we're not traditional linear thinkers. We're very good at being eclectic in the way, in the information that we absorb, how we process it, and how we create an output. And we're very good at puzzles, at putting things together and creating wholes and synthesizing them. and creating relationships, which is probably the most important part of today's conversation, because when we are talking about societies, it's all about relationships. One of the ways that we can do it is looking at nature. Biomimicry is literally learning from nature or mimicking nature. So if we think about nature as a model and emulate nature, or as a measure and let nature be our judge, so how good is our design, let nature judge it. And nature as a mentor, so a teacher and not a resource. If we use these models of thinking, we can come up with really innovative stuff. And I urge everyone to look at biomimicry.org. It's a wonderful website, which is where this example at the bottom of the page comes from. Might not be the best example for today's conversation, but it's one that I really love. It's from a high school competition, high school challenge, where some high school children got together and synthesized this product based on marine organisms, use of hexagons, and freeze-resistant Arctic fish, which all are, they sound like random things that are not really interconnected, but by researching them and connecting them, they've come up with this biobrick, which is, a unique hexagonal shape. So it's really easy to put it together. It's really strong because it's got calcium in it, and it's got multiple materials that are bound together that are waste materials. So it's actually carbon positive. So they've really ticked so many boxes in this really low-tech product just by having the research that looks into the different natural resources and processes and putting them together in an unusual way. So again, everyone, please go to biomimicry.org. I'm sure it will blow your minds. Beautiful resource. Another resource that I think everyone should be aware of is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a think tank for circular economy. Now, circular economy is a very current, trendy part of our conversation. I think everyone's heard of it by now, but just to run through it very quickly, it's recognizing that current processes are very linear. The way we produce things are very linear. We extract things from the ground or from nature. We process them into products. We use those products and then we throw them out as waste. So circular economy is saying, that's not a very good approach. We're going to run out of resources very quickly. If we continue with this approach, we need to actually keep things in circulation as long as possible. If we can keep them in circulation, we need to repurpose them and reuse them. If we can't do that, we need to refurbish them. If we can't do that, we need to recycle them. And the absolute last thing we want to do is to actually throw them away, waste them, because, waste is not really part of nature. If you look around you, no other animal in nature actually has waste, just people. So we're a bit strange like that. So probably not a very good behavior, something that we should break the habits and stop doing. And the people that do all these things best are First Nations people across the world. They see themselves as custodians rather than consumers. They recognize that we have responsibility and a sense of purpose. We are doing for country is something that's very prevalent with Aboriginal people. They have deep knowledge of country and deep time understanding. So deep time, I don't know if it's a notion that everyone is familiar with, but it's the notion of our place as humans in the very, very long history of our planet. It's not even a comma in a very, very long sentence. It's a very short blip on the radar of time. And when you understand that and you have that respect for our place as a blip in nature versus the rest of nature, and how can we be in service of that? It just gives you that humility and that perspective that I think we can learn a lot from. And I definitely see First Nations people across the world and Aboriginal people in particular as experts in systems thinking and biomimicry that we can learn a lot from. Now, just talking very quickly about a couple of frameworks that we use in practice. It's not something that you have to look into, but if you are a bit lost for, where do I begin with this giant topic of conversation. Where do I even start my journey? You can look into these couple of resources that are quite useful. The first one is One Planet Living, which is an initiative by Bioregional. It's a framework. It's not a measuring tool, but it's a framework that is looking into living within our planetary boundaries. So how do we live within our means, essentially? And they've broken it up into different categories, which are health and happiness, equity and economy, culture and community, land and nature, sustainable water, sustainable food, travel and transport, product, waste, and energy. So all these things, if you go on their website, they break it down even further, and they give you tools for assessing how your design or how your development tracks against them. So again, if you're stuck for a place to start, that's quite a useful tool. The other one that I absolutely love and use almost every day is the Living Building Challenge from the Living Future Institute. It's quite similar in its approach. You know, it's got petals because they believe that a building should be like a flower. It should be beautiful, but also productive. And the petals are beauty, place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, and equity. So it's sort of similar to Green Star in some of the terminology, but at the same time, it's got more ephemeral sort of aspirations that Green Star doesn't quite have yet. And it's asking the question, you know, what if every single act of design and construction made the world a better place? And that's, for me, a beautiful summation of regenerative design. You know, every act of design should have a positive impact. So if you look into that framework in a bit more detail, again, you can go on the website. It's got wonderful tools that you can tap into. It actually takes you through these different categories, and it tells you, you know, how to measure ecology of place, how to measure urban agriculture, how to measure habitat exchange, etc. So finally, if we look at understanding of place, I just wanted to give you some questions that you can start to ask yourselves as you move through the design process. And as we said on Saturday, if you were there during the briefing, we always do a site analysis when we do a project, but there are other questions we can ask about place that we don't always do, and I think we should. And again, it goes back to, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as, you know, sitting there and observing nature, or do we see ourselves as part of nature? We are in it. So every place on Earth has, you know, geological, natural, and human and cultural history. So if we understand all these different layers of place, we can start to have a deeper connection, a deeper understanding of what place actually is. And the story of place is beautifully articulated in this movie called My Octopus Teacher, which, if you haven't watched, I highly recommend. This guy actually went and dived in the same place every day for a year. And he not discovered, but he encountered an octopus in this place that he was going to. And by going there every day and getting to know this octopus on a day-to-day basis, he got to know the place and the animal so well that it almost became part of his family. And the level of knowledge and emotional connection that he had with the place just was mind-blowing. So it's a beautiful story and a beautiful way of thinking about, you know, how can we actually get deep knowledge of place. If we think about the questions that we might ask ourselves when we go through this exercise, through this competition, we can ask ourselves, what does almost everybody know about the place or the community that we're thinking of? And, you know, you can just write a few notes about your place or your community that you're working on within this competition. What does almost nobody realize about the place or community? What is hidden? What is the secret thing or secret things that you can unlock through some deep thinking and deep connection to that place or that community? what things contribute to the living systems of the place or the community. And by living systems, I mean beyond human. What other animals or plants or paths or connections or waterways are in this place or this community? This is a bit of a different one, just to throw a bit of a curveball. How would you describe your place or your community through musical terms? And if musical terms don't work for you, think about other terms. It might be poetic terms. It might be colors. It might be food or other sensory connections that you might have to that place or that community. But the point is to think about it in different terminologies other than, the place is, my site is flat, it's got 3 trees and there's a pond. You could think about your site as being, is it slow or is it fast? Does it have moments of crescendo or diminuendo through the day? Does it have a lot of activity? Is it repetitive? Is it accelerated? Is it homogenized? Is it restless? Is it silence? What sort of soundscapes are there through the day or through the night? What happens through seasons in this space? What are the rhythms that you might articulate about the place or the community that you're thinking of? What are the unique patterns of the place or the community that you're looking at? And by patterns, I mean natural systems, but also human forces that shape the place and continue to shape the place, and potentially into the future as well. So the component of time, I think, is really important when you look at patterns, especially when you think about, pre-colonization and post-colonization and what might happen in the future if we try and restore this place. What are the capacities of the place or the community? So what's the potential of the place? And it's really important to, sort of move away from extractive terms of how we can use it, but think about what can we do for it? What sort of benefits can we give to this place or give our community through this place? And those benefits should be considered in the context, as we said before, within nested systems. So from small scale to medium to large to extra large. What sort of systems are interconnected and can be impacted through this space? So some really big concepts there, but hopefully there's some triggers here that would help you start the conversation and start thinking about your design. So hopefully everyone had a bit of a chance to think about some of these concepts and come up with some questions for me that you can put in the chat. And hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming. I know there's some really big ideas in here. So if you want to go back to any of the slides, I'm happy to do that. If you want to just start hitting me with questions, I'm happy to get stuck right into it.
Thank you so much, Yara. Lots of stuff to think about. It really is. I feel like everyone's kind of like maybe seen the place that they were thinking about in a different light, and are able to kind of delve into those regenerative design thinking, which is something that's not easy to, I feel like it's not easy to kind of develop. I feel like it's something you have to work on and constantly be doing. I mean, every aspect of your life, really. And so my question for you is, so you're talking about this idea that you can reveal things about a place that are hidden, and how we in the brief actually wrote to find the hidden identities of place. And so maybe you can give us a, if you have one, an example that's personal to you, or maybe something that you've maybe noticed in another project or your own project, in where you found kind of something hidden in place that you were able to kind of highlight and celebrate and give back to through architecture, or design. Yeah,
it's a really good question. I'm just trying to think which example to pick, and I'll pick a very simple one because it's easy to start with the simple examples and then sort of extrapolate from there. But a hidden place can be as simple as identifying a species that was previously occupying this place and has become extinct through human use, and restoring that habitat. That's just one very simple example of, hidden agencies within the place. But it can be something a bit more profound, like there could be ceremonies that were enacted on that place that we are unaware of, and through connection with cultural engagement and speaking with Aboriginal elders, we might uncover the extra meaning that this place used to have and that has been obliterated and can now be brought back to life potentially. So, that's the ultimate, for me, that's the ultimate healing of place and healing of country, and what we should aspire to with every project. And I see that Aramel actually has his hand up. So Aramel, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for your presentation, Yara. So what I took from it was that that the regenerative design thinking has developed, in this age because of a lot of the issues that are coming from the climate and society. So I wanted to know your opinion on how has modern day technology positively or negatively affected the regenerative design mindset?
It's a very loaded question. Amel, thank you for that. I don't actually have a singular answer. So in some aspects, technology can be a great tool in connecting people and, having a positive impact. At the same time, it can be quite terrible because to create technology, we have to extract some really, often poisonous materials, and, people can get really hurt in extracting those materials, and there's a lot of slavery that goes on around it, etc. So I have a love-hate relationship with technology. So on the one hand, it's a wonderful tool, it's beautiful, and it's great that we have it and that we can use it. At the same time, I find it really hard to throw things away, or I find it hard to use batteries because they're so harmful to the environment and to the people that extract them. So it is a very loaded question, but I think one of the things that we can do is recognize that technology is not necessarily a good solution, but it can be useful in some ways. And like everything in this conversation around regenerative design, there isn't a single answer. It's a very big problem and a very big topic, and there are many answers. There's not a singular answer. I think for me, it's about having the right approach of having a positive impact. So in the great scheme of things, you need to consider what are the positive impacts of the technology that you have in mind. Are the positives outweighing the negatives? If so, then this technology is fine. But are there any ways of doing what you want to do without using this technology? Because technology inherently, it's going to fail, it's going to get wasted, and it's not necessarily that good in and of itself. So yeah, and a lot of my clients really want to use carbon accounting and that sort of thing, and it's the same sort of conundrum for me, because on the one hand, we don't want to have emissions and we don't want to have too much carbon, etc. But at the same time, that technology, that carbon accounting, is actually not terribly accurate. So are the answers that we're giving our clients the best answers that we can give them? Probably not. So where is the merit in that? But we can only do the best that we can with the technology that we've got. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and I may ask, what is carbon accounting?
So carbon neutrality is something that's very topical at the moment. People actually want to be carbon neutral, and that means that, for example, for our business at the moment, we're doing a carbon audit. So Charlie is doing a carbon audit. We're checking, where is our business using carbon? Where do the emissions come from? How can we reduce the carbon emissions that we're generating? And most of them come from transportation, driving to or from work, flying between the studios. We've got 6 studios across Australia, so flying around nationally, things like that. So how can we cut it back? Less flights, less use of personal cars, more bike riding, more conference meetings online, etc.
Yeah.
And then the emissions that we can't actually reduce, we offset. We offset them by buying carbon offsets. So we'll leave it at that for now. Armel, if you do want to know more, let me know. We can have this conversation. One of my favorite topics. So
No, thank you.
always happy to chat. No worries. And Hanis, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? No, I'll just read it out then.
Oh,
Hanis,
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question was, could you elaborate on the Aboriginal community systems, like how it works so successfully with nature?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a sad story, as you all know, because when white people first came to Australia, they sort of looked around and went, oh, you know, there's no agriculture here, there's no cultivation of the land. These people are hunters, gatherers, and they sort of put that label on Aboriginal people. And it's only years down the line when people actually opened their eyes and started to look around and actually speak to Aboriginal people and listen to them, more importantly, that they realized that there was actually grand scale agriculture across the entire continent and grand scale barter system that was happening again across the continent and social structures that was again connected across the continent. So there's a really good book by Tim Flannery called, and I forgot the name now, of course, but I will get back to you with the name, Hanis. But Tim actually wrote that book back in the 90s, and he was describing how, it's called Future Eaters. So future eaters, because he was saying that Aboriginal people had that ability to look at the entire continent and cultivate it and actually extract, or not extract, but grow enough food to survive in these really harsh conditions by treating the whole continent as a system. So if you want to read Tim's book, Tim Flannery, Future Eaters, absolutely fantastic.
I'm sorry, how do you spell the last name?
Tim Flannery, Eaters.
All right, thank you so much.
No worries. And dark emu is a bit controversial, Rebecca. Apparently, Pasco isn't exactly as knowledgeable as we might have thought, but that's okay. Still a very interesting book. Jardine, is that how you say your name? Jardine, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. So I was wondering how you navigate the desire that I'm sure it might be in you, same as me, not to really build anything at all and instead focus on habitat restoration.
Yes, wonderful question. So we always, Hamish Charlie has a very robust design methodology. And the first thing we do is we ask our clients a lot of questions. For example, do we actually need this development? Can we do this in a different way? Can we actually use an existing building to do what you want to do, etc.? So, you know, by working in Hamish Charlie and having this really good system of asking a lot of questions, it actually makes our projects a lot more robust. And it, you know, personally, it gives me a lot of peace of mind knowing that we are going through that process. But for you as a designer, I would absolutely say, always ask the question, can we achieve what we want to achieve without building something new? And if we can't, if we do have to build something new, can we have a positive impact through it? Can we have habitat restoration, even though we are putting some new form of construction on site? And that's something that the Living Building Challenge works through really well. So I encourage you to go have a look at it. And Alex, you very patiently had your hand up for a very long time. So would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Yara. First of all, thank you for that presentation.
Pleasure.
My question lies solely, from my understanding, regenerative design, right, has these two facets. There's the social regenerative aspect and its environmental influence. My question is must it have both, or is the social regeneration enough of a factor for it to be a regenerative? As in, if, and in relation to the brief, it's regenerative capacity in terms of community in that? If it has only that, is that enough, or must it have both in balance?
So to be truly regenerative, every act of design should have a positive impact. So whatever you're designing, every part of it should have a positive impact to be truly regenerative. However, for the purpose of this exercise, we won't ask you to go down this path in its entirety, because it's impossible to achieve in a week, and we recognize it, and that's fine. So it's more about considering what we would like to achieve through this exercise, through this competition, is to have people consider the regenerative framework and take from it what you will. If it's one thing that you take from it, that's great. If it's 2 or 3, fantastic. If it's 87, even better. We won't put a number on it. You know, it doesn't, it's not about quantifying the number of things that you get out of it. It's about getting the gist of the approach. That's really what we want to see, that you get the spirit of regeneration, and how you show it through your design, that's entirely up to you. Again, it's not, we're not going to quantify it and measure it. We are going to look for the spirit of it. Hopefully that helps, Alex. I know it's not precise, but as they said in the castle, it's about the vibe. It's Mabo, it's the vibe. And yeah, that's what it is.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Just because doing more research on it, you kind of get into the snowball of
it's huge.
The field. Yeah, but thank you. That does help.
No worries. Yeah. And Albertina, you had a question about the specification of site. And we've clarified that it doesn't need to be in Australia. It can be anywhere in the world, so long as you know it quite well, and you're able to articulate your design wherever the site might be. Any other questions from anyone? It's all clear as mud. Beautiful.
Okay, how about we end on your final kind of advice to anyone, you know, in the competition, and how to approach their site in the span of the 5 days, I think, that they have left.
Yeah, not much time left. My advice would be to do a fair chunk of reading up front, a fair bit of thinking up front, and let it sort of percolate for a couple of days, and really look at as many research resources as you can, because it is a very big topic, but the more you read about it, the more you enrich yourself around it, the more robust your response will be. And find the things that excite you. And as I said to Alex, it doesn't need to be a million things, it can just be one. Find the one thing that excites you, or 2 or 3 or whatever it is, that speaks to you personally, and focus on that. Because once it's personal, once you get personally passionate about it, you will get wonderful outcomes, and you will just enjoy it. And that's what regenerative design is all about. It's about having a positive impact on yourself as a designer, as well as the community and the outcome. So just have fun with it.